Hello, welcome to another video. Eulier Gonzalez here. We're gonna talk about fetching data in view components and how can we do that also in React 18. So far we know how can we fetch data in React 18 and it has a particular way of doing that using custom hooks, which is this way of how you can encapsulate logic so you can reuse across different components, and that is called now through the use effect, which is allows you to now perform these side effects. So side effects like talking to a remote server, talking to browser APIs, for example, querying the DOM, or talking to a database here, whether it's IndexedDB or local storage. Uh, also talking to animations here. But again, this is the way of how now React 18 handles that. And in today's video, we're gonna do that how now in Vue 3, this reactive compiler optimized rendering system, and that is the key of this, how it works, and what is the thing that it provides to solve that issue of fetching data. Let's get into this. So this is a course taught by Ben Hum. I'm just taking notes out of this and then improve not only my soft skills but also my hard skills when it comes to implement solutions to business and do that in the most fast, effective way possible. So, yep, let's get into this. So fetching data. As you can see, I already took some notes out of this, but back in when I did that, I didn't know how to actually so I didn't understand why we are using Vue. I just memorizing all of this kind of stuff, but I didn't understand the root problem. And that's why now here we are in today's video as a way to not only recap this section and also move into the composition API, which is a very nice thing in Vue 3. I have experience working with Vue 3 and how now this is the way of how you can encapsulate is logic in your Vue components. Pretty much like custom hooks in React 18, but here is, we're gonna see that. In today's video, but let's get into fetching data here.
So let's go ahead and jump back into the code. As we can see here, we have a lot going on right now, and since we're talking about kind of a new concept in regards to fetching async data, let's go ahead and clean this up a bit, right? So I'm gonna migrate this over into a separate scratch pad. And so inside of components, I'm gonna just create a scratchpad.vue file, and we're just gonna migrate everything from app.vue.
Scratchpad.
And that way you have that as reference for later on if you wanna see exactly what happened. So we'll clean this up and keep this a standard new, basically a muse app. Great. And I'll go ahead and commit that to the branch. Let's see, refactor, move code, move code to scratchpad.
Move code to scratchpad.
Right.
Okay, cool.
All right, so the question here is the data we've been working with so far, like if we take a look at scratchpad, everything is something that we've defined ourselves.
Synchronous.
And we're assuming basically that we always have full control of the data. And if that were really the case for front-end development, I think our lives would be a lot easier. But the reality is we have to fetch data from the back end a lot of times, and we got to figure out how to deal with that.
Okay. So this is quite interesting here, because when we need to actually, when we talk about fetching data or something that there's another course from Yivni Ray, where we now we are able to understand what are the responsibilities of front-end developers, which is API communications, data management, so how you're going to store your data and access through that, how you're going to manage, how you're going to access your data, how you're going to store and manage your data, as well as how you're going to handle its complex user interfaces. So in our case, using is the or the observer API, where now it allows to cover specific use cases like intersection API, mutation, and resize API. Very interesting stuff to actually help us to solve most of the common problems that we as a UI specialist needs to handle. And libraries like Quasar, right? Actually, this is a very interesting segue. Libraries like Quasar help us to actually handle that particularly things, right? So as you can see here, we're using is now the resizer observer, some sort of directive that we can use. As you can see, is this. But this is part of the, let me see, observers and the scroll events. Okay, observers. Okay, so you have now the scroll observer, which is now using is the resize observer for elements. Okay, which is interesting. There are several observers that we can go with. Here they're using is one of the most common, which is resize and scroll. All right. So as a way to determine to where you're going to need to scroll, but there are others common. So infinite scroll, I'm assuming that is using is, for example, virtual scroll here, infinite scroll. This is interesting. They don't mention that. But the thing here, observer resizes. Okay, again, this is a very specific user interface that allow us to handle is all of these most common things that we're gonna use. For example, the editor, this must use design mode, making content editable, exit command and content editable spec. This is something that is using behind the scenes the or it should use is the mutation observer. But again, I don't want to dive deep into the weeds. I just want to mention that here this is one of the responsibilities as a front-end engineer we have to handle. That is the user interface or the user interactions to cover most of the common use cases. Intersection observer, the resize observer, as well as the mutation observer, and also the asset management. So here in this section, anytime we don't own the data, so for example, data that come from a server, now we need to find a way of how can we integrate that in our code, which is fetching data.
So if we take the tools that we have right now and think about how we might do that, let's go ahead and use the Poke API, which is one of my favorites when it comes to working with sample data, because I think Pokemon was a fun thing for me growing up as a kid. And so basically, this is a pretty impressive database in terms of being able to fetch things about individual Pokemon, fetch it by region. It's darn impressive. So the URL we're going to be using,
it's darn impressive. This is interesting. Using the API here, using that, it's darn impressive. It's darn. It's damn impressive. It's French toast impressive. Exactly, we use that. It's French toast impressive. Completely. It's French toast impressive, this Pokemon API.
Add a comment up here is this pokeapi.com, and you notice the main thing is that it just fetches the Pokemon and it limits it to the first 151. So in other words, the original 150.
So we're gonna get it the original.
So our first goal here is to say, okay, how do we fetch that data down from the backend and actually render it onto our page? Well, first thing first, let's go and set up our app real quick. We'll export default and object. And for our reactive data property, let's go ahead and just have a Pokedex. array.
Exactly. So here we
And
are
then we actually
defining
add
is
some
now
added
the
features, of course.
configuration object for the reactivity system, for the reactivity rendering system
See it. Let me
view.
show it on the page.
So we're gonna now register is the state that we want to manage, the state that
There
we
you go,
want you
already
to
showing
keep
up.
track of, as well as what is
Next
some
thing we want to do is add some sort of
computations if we need to, methods, watchers, and props and emits. This is something new in View 3. View 2, we don't have that. We just actually have to emit that. Now the thing here is that we have now a way of how you can register all of this event that this component can emit. Following is the same way of how now HTML actually works, because this is one of the things that View 3 have in mind. It is designed to be approachable in terms of reusing the existing web standards, unlike React that is focused on creating user elements, all right? And that's why they're using behind the scenes now a wrapper around the document, and they provide some sort of methods and helper functions to actually now create your own HTML tags and provide them with some props and some or configuration objects, as well as the child component that this React component will have, pretty much like an HTML, which is now an enhanced HTML. That the idea here is that we don't need to actually is calling the JavaScript code to execute all of our user interface. So anytime we actually we want to create now a section, for example, with a card, what you're gonna show is the image and the card and the description and the button. So instead of us having to create each one of those elements, now there is something called the GSX that allows to do that. This JavaScript extended markup language, where here it's a alright, because behind the scenes, after all, React what it's doing is calling is a JavaScript code to create all of this user interface or HTML tags. Okay, that's going to actually make our life much more easy and descriptive by using this syntax, GSX syntax. Again, this is very specific to React, and in the case of Vue 3, is more about now passing in say configuration object to this reactive rendering system. What we're gonna register is all of the things that we want to keep track or to store them. So our reactive data, like data, or this is something interesting. Again, this is part of the option API, because then we have the composition API for that. So, but in any case, the idea here is that understand what are we passing through and what are what are we communicating to that library? What are we describing to the library? It's like, hey, this is only user interface. In the case of React, it's like, hey, no, it's now is the state that we want to keep track, as well as the HTML, right? So different approach where all of them behind the scenes is just an HTML interpolator. Okay. Let's get into this.
A method, right? Because we need to actually call this thing. So you might think, okay, so we have a method called fetch Pokemon, and it will use the fetch API, and then we'll go ahead and grab this URL up here. Whoops, there we go. And then what we need to do though is that oftentimes when you fetch data from the back end, you need to actually JSONify it. In other words, you need to like convert it to JSON so you can actually parse it correctly on the front end. So the way you do that is you take the response that you're given and you do response.json. And so what we want to do though is we don't only want to fetch this, we want to actually assign this to our Pokedex, right? So we're going to do this top Pokedex equals fetch. But we're not quite done, because what? Fetch is an async operation. And right now everything we're writing is in a synchronous operation. So in other words here, what we got to do is we got to say, hey, we have to wait for fetch to finish before we do this thing. And since
And
we need to await the
what
thing,
you
we
have to
actually
wait,
make sure
you
we
have to
tell
make
Vue, hey,
async.
by the way, this is an async function. It's going to happen asynchronously. Great, we have our method, and so, all right, we want to fetch the thing, right? So let's say, okay, so we have a button, and when we click the button, this is when we want to run that fetch Pokemon. So fetch Pokemon like that. Great, let's see what happens now. If we click, hey, everything's there just as we expect. This is exciting. But if we think about the real world scenario, while there are cases where you'll be running async functions on specific user interactions, the reality is a lot of times when someone's loading a page, that's probably when you're actually going to be wanting to fetch that data. And more importantly, you want to fetch it at a specific time frame. And so this is where the concept of lifecycle hooks comes into play when we're talking about front-end frameworks. And I think most of them do have them. So let's take a look at the diagram for lifecycle hooks.
Yeah, because most of the time we want to fetch data is on the when the component is mounted, right?
To be able to kind of get familiar with the docs, because Vue has an entire team dedicated to trying to make sure that the docs are as top-notch as they can, and that basically this information is free and available to you whenever it's time for you to dive into these problems. And so if we take a look at here we can see an actual diagram of how the lifecycle works. And so you can see that Vue, what it starts to do is the renderer kicks it off, and then it runs a setup lifecycle hook, which again we'll talk more about later.
This is pretty much following the same pattern that the React does.
Outlined rectangle. So we have setup, before create, created, before mount. All of these are different points inside of the lifecycle of a component. And what that means is you can actually basically interject different code depending on where you need it to run. So for example, you see here that what is it doing? First, it starts to encounters the component. It starts to initialize the options API. And then it starts to do some checks, basically, right? And then it starts to render the component. It'll actually mount some check here to the actual window. Basically, you start to actually see the thing. And then finally, if you're deleting something, it will unmount the thing from the DOM. And so, to be clear, I do not expect any of you to understand like the full effect of what's happening here. But suffice to know that you can refer to this at any point in the future when you're starting to get a little bit more nuance about where you want your code to run. For the purposes of our exercise, though, we have to think about it like this. When the component, if we wait for the component to mount before we actually start running the code to fetch, we know that asynchronous calls can take a while. And what we want to do is try to improve our user experience by ensuring that users get that data as quickly as possible, which means what? We want to actually try to initiate that fetch before the component even renders to the screen. That way, we try to time it so that by the time the component hits the screen, you're hoping that the async data basically has hopefully finished by then. And so if we take a look at where that is, basically the way to think of it in your head at this point is mounted is the point when the mounted lifecycle hook is when it's basically showing up on the screen. That's the way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in other words, you have the ability to say before mount. There's one right here. But then there's also a couple of steps happening before mount. So actually we
So for example, in the create, because this is part of the lifecycle here.
even have the created lifecycle hook.
But it says, hey, the index option API has been created, okay, and then it's created before create and being created, okay, because now they have these two different options that you can now talk to the reactive rendering system.
And but there's a key thing that you'll notice here, though, is that with before create, this is happening before the options API. And so what does that mean? I think it'll be easier if I show you this inside of the code. So let me go ahead and bump this over. Okay.
So it's like you don't have access
so
to the
right now.
data here.
That passing an object in order to define how our component is working is called the options API. You can see here, there are data, there are methods. And so similarly, we have the ability to call lifecycle hooks on this. So we have, what did we see earlier? Before create was one of them. And so before create can be a function that we run. And so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to log before create, and then we're going to try to log this .pokedex. And then we're going to log the created lifecycle hook. Basically, this is how you're going to call the individual lifecycle hooks, is by basically the name right here that we see here. This is a little small right now because of the mobile responsive. And then just basically calling it as a function. That's how you actually reference it. And so when created now we'll do a log create. And then this
what it means is that before create is that the instance is not being created.
Okay, what's going to happen here? Well, if we take a look inside of our dev tools, you'll notice something here. Is that before create gets logged, but then this .pokedex does not
exist, exactly.
However, then once created does,
once it's creating is because it's now the reactive rendering system is say, hey, all right, now I spin off this.
Of what's happening. And so if we think about it in another way, if we rearrange this for our mental model, before create is actually happening, all this stuff below here even exists. And so if that's the case, that means that when you're using the options API, before create is probably not actually the best place to be running an asynchronous function, because at this point nothing exists. So what we want to make sure we do then is to basically say when
it's being created.
It's not the same as mounted. There's a bunch of stuff happening before it's actually mounted to the page. Once it's been created, this is where we're going to say, let's kick off our function. So what we can do is we can then go this.fetch Pokemon. Now we save this though, you'll see, boom. All of a sudden, without clicking anything, it did exactly what we want it to, which is the user hit the page, the Vue did its thing to go fetch the data, it immediately showed up on the screen. Okay. How do people feel about those concepts? That make sense? Question.
Are those hooks promise aware? If you were to return the promise to this fetch Pokemon, would it pause continuation until it returned?
So your question here is around whether the lifecycle hooks are aware. Oh, can you actually just return a promise?
Yeah.
Instead?
Would the created not continue until the promise resolves? If you wanted to, like, for some reason not
Yeah.
mount, but until the promise is fully resolved.
Before you actually move on to the next hook, basically.
Yeah.
So in this regard, like you don't want run it. I don't see why that wouldn't be possible. Vue usually has ways for you to break those things apart so that you can basically stop it. And so this would be to be clear, this is a little bit beyond the scope of the intro. So if this goes a little beyond what your current knowledge, don't worry. But basically, if you've heard of things like next tick inside of code bases, that's where people are like manually like initiating different stages to ensure that like either different frames are being skipped or moved on. And so just know that if you're trying to intentionally stop it at the lifecycle hook, you probably have to dig into it just to figure out how that would work. Because normally, Vue as you can see, it tries to optimize it. Because normally you might even expect at this point, let me go back to the code. Close that. This .fetch Pokemon is an asynchronous function, and so so here's the thing: if we were to call the fetch directly here, and we did in await. Okay, so let me do this real quick, and then let's just const response equals this, and let's just log response. Okay. So, all right, you'll see already that Vue is yelling at me, because if you call any sort of, if you actually manually define an await keyword inside of a lifecycle hook, it will ask that you actually define the async on.
As an async of that.
However, since we're not doing that, since we actually have the async already defined on the function, this is why this code still works. But otherwise, to your question, yeah, I would just dive further into how to get it to pause, but otherwise you should be able to do what you want.
So this is now in terms of that, it's not internally, because this is an async operations, a promise base is internally now in this life cycle. Vue is handled that for us. By the time that this component is created, because it has several life cycle here in Vue, you have now in the composition API, first is the setup, and then you have now the before create. That's when after that is the option API is created. Then you have now the create lifecycle, and then you have now a decision making.
And what that means is,
or some check that it needs to be done, which is, hey, is the compile template on the fly? No or yes. It's a hey, it has pre-compiled the template. If it's yes, all right, then he move on to the before mount. If it's not, then he compile the template on the fly. So not only that, is that as you move down to mount the component, so you have now the before mount as a way to trigger that, and then is when it's going to initialize the render and create the insert DOM node. And that particular phase is when when Vue actually is append DOM, is now render that, now render and create or insert the DOM nodes. That's interesting. And then once that is done, okay, now it's gonna call the mount process. Interesting. It's gonna call the mount. It's gonna call the what the French stuff. It's gonna call the mount process. So this mount process is gonna now listen actively for data that change, right? So hey, if there is because at the end of the day, Vue is that it's a reactive rendering system. So once you mount that, now React will say, hey, I'm gonna listen for events. So when I change state or when data change, now I have is this particular life cycle, which is before updates and updated. So before update is like, hey, before a data change, I want you to run some callbacks. Then it's gonna re-render and patch those changes, and then provide you another hook, which is updated. Hey, by the time now those changes has been applied to the DOM, is going to be updated. It's going to now expose the update lifecycle to be, so you can pass some sort of callback. And after that, then you have now the before unmount and the mount unmounted. This is something that comes especially from React class-based components, right? When you have now, and this is something that, because this is life cycles on reactive events, okay? But now life cycles in React, but because this is now this is on React 16 and 17, and a lot of people actually still using that thing. So when you have now is a way of a way to check a way to verify when these components is mounted or unmounted. That's when you have now component that mount, okay, in component will unmount. That's very, very interesting. But this is now has these two particularly life cycles. And things are quite simple here, right? So component that bound is when you in the class-based components is when you call those side effects. For example, when you do when you do your Ajax request, okay, and then component will unmount is when you clean up the state. Again, this is not for the reactive perspective, okay, but now things has changed in the sense that hey, here we're going to split now in these particular phases, which is the trigger, render, and commit, right? And after that, you're going to now trigger is this hooks or this side effects that will happen after the commit phase. Again, remember that at the end of the day, this is something, let me actually put it here this way, similar for the view life cycles. Remember that the idea of this, I think this is on view 2. No. Okay. Remember that the idea of this, all right, is to understand the problem of this. And that is that Vue, React and Vue, they solve different problems, and they have different approach to solve the same problem, which is how you can now write its user interface in the most maintainable, testable, and debuggable way possible. Okay, so because of that, so now React say, hey, I'm going to define is per these components some life cycles as a way to know what would like to do, some callbacks here, right? So you say, hey, before component will mount, which is here. Okay. Wait, what? Exactly. Component did mount is like, hey, I already mount this component, and I want to now is run some of this async operations, some of these side effects. For example, Ajax requests or browser APIs, reading a local storage or an IndexedDB, or access to the DOM or to the animation, right? And the component will unmount. So this is now in the case of reactive effects, which is now in React 18. They say, hey, let's gonna use now the use effect here, and the setup function. And in the setup code will be is the moment when we're going to mount, or we're gonna run the callback of the mount, And then on the cleanup function is mimicking the behavior of component will of mount. But now this is on the functional approach. So again, remember that React 18, after all, is just for building user interface. And in the case of Vue, is this reactive rendering system. And I know I'm repeating a lot. The whole point is to understand deeply this. Okay. So now things started to make sense. And this is also interesting in terms of learning by comparison. This is most of the time one way of how you can learn, and I learn, and also through stories, right? Because we make sense of the world through stories. Yep, okay, cool. So yeah, this is the life cycle here. And when we want to fetch data, we do that on the created. That's interesting. That's interesting. So unlike in React, when we do that is using a use hook, we use it as use effect, and anytime we want us to render data when this component is mounted, we use effect, and we pass an array of dependency, and we pass an empty array of dependency, indicating to the React, hey, we want you to now run this code only once when the component is mounted, right? And when you unmount it and remount it, you also going to run that particular code. So that is now how things makes a lot of sense. And I will. We need to actually create a particular. Okay, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make that.
And so, to be clear, I do not expect
To build
any of you
is
to understand, like,
the
like,
fetch
effect
using the Pokemon API
But
as a way to
suffice
fetch
know
the
that
data
you
in
refer
one
to this as
component and the
in
other.
future, you'll
Okay.
start to get a little bit more nuance about where you want your code to run. For the purposes of our exercise, though, we have to think about it like this. When the component, if we wait for the component to mount before we actually start running the code to fetch, we know that asynchronous calls can take a while. And what we want to do is try to improve our user experience by ensuring that users get that data as quickly as possible. Which means what? We want to actually try to initiate that fetch before the component even renders to the screen. That way, we try to time it so that by the time the component hits the screen, you're hoping that the async data basically has hopefully finished by then. And so if we take a look at where that is, basically the way to think of it in your head at this point is mounted is the point when the mounted lifecycle hook is when it's basically showing up on the screen. That's the way to think about it. Log before create, and then we're going to try to log this .pokedex. And then we're going to log the created lifecycle hook. So basically, this is basically how you're going to call the individual lifecycle hooks, is by before create gets actually the best place running an asynchronous function, because at this point nothing exists. So, question.
Are those hooks promise aware? If you were to return the promise to this fetch Pokemon, would it pause continuation until it returned?
So your question here is around whether the lifecycle hooks are aware. Oh, can you actually just return if you've heard of things like next tick inside of code bases, that's where people are like manually like initiating different stages to ensure that like either different frames are being skipped or moved on. And so just know that if you're trying to intentionally stop it at the lifecycle hook, you probably have to dig into it just to figure out how that would work. Because normally, as you can see, it tries to optimize it. Because normally you might even expect at this point, let me go back to the code. Oh, let me close that. This .fetch Pokemon is an asynchronous function, and so so here's the thing: if we were to call the fetch directly here, and we did an await, or that kind of thing. But otherwise, just know that create is kind of going to be your bread and butter when using the options API for doing async.
Bread and butter.
Where you might want to time either some sort of animations. And then if you really have something that you really want to happen like right when the component is mounted, then I've seen a lot of before mount or mounted used for those scenarios where you might want to time either some sort of animation or that kind of thing. But otherwise, just know that create is kind of going to be your bread and butter when using the options API for doing asynchronous
Exactly. Next thing might do the trick. This is when it comes to the lifecycle hook, how to pause the live execution. Next tick might do the trick. At which lifecycle do I make API calls created? Exactly before or after the component. So after the React now create the instance that is going to keep track, now it is time for you to actually perform this async operation. And before mount and unmount are usually for animations or DOM operations. Okay. Anyway. ID visibility is only for components, not the HTML elements. And generate unique key using a UID on the client. Ideally, this is something that the back should auto-generate for you.
So if we're taking a look at the code that we have right now, you'll notice that if you checked out the 09-begin branch, you'll notice there's a new project in here called C'est la Vue. And so for those not familiar with the French, C'est la Vie just means that it's life, this is life, and so this is Vue. And so inside of here, we actually do have a little bit happening here. So I do want to walk through this with you because I will try to sort of centralize the exercises around C'est la Vue in order to just provide like some context and basically give you the experience of walking into a project that either has already had some, call it legacy code, and that way you feel like you're working with stuff. But that said, I want to emphasize, if you feel more comfortable just working with your TV show forum app to apply these concepts, please feel free to do so. I just wanted to provide different context to allow you that practice of seeing what it's like when working with code bases. So let's go and switch over in here real quick into C'est la Vue. And let's go ahead and run that. npm run. Oh, it's on 7.4 now. Oh, that's right, the other one's running. Okay, here we go. We have C'est la Vue. It's a fairly simple app, but it has a little bit of styling this time, so not just raw HTML and whatever the browser provides. And we have a home and login page, or at least what appears to be. If we take a look at our app.vue, you'll notice that there are two components that are already pre-built for you. There's a home page and a login page. If you look inside of package.json, you'll see there still is no router library. So there's no like paths being changed or anything right now. What we're doing here is that traditional single page application model, which is like every JavaScript trying to manage everything, and so it's just routed there. And so what's actually happening here is you have this reactive data that's tracking the state of the current page, quote unquote. And so here we have two methods that assign the current page to home or login. And then down here, we have the ability to say, okay, well, if the current page is home, show this component. If it's the login page, show, or if current page is login, actually in this case it's
exactly, it's now this
for
navigation.
routing, eventually we're going to get into the library that allows to teach you how to switch routes. But if you have a list of components that you might need to swap in and out and make it dynamic, it's kind of hard to have that all managed out inside of your templates, right? Either the conditionals will get complicated. How would that actually work? So when it comes to dynamically swapping out components, Vue has a native component aptly called component, because what you're doing is you're basically defining a generic component that JavaScript will basically help to define. So in the case of our app, for example, what we do is we pass it a prop called is, and this is a specially designed prop for the native component. And so if we just do it manually ourselves, we can say, basically we can say, oh, we're going to the home page. And so in this particular case, you'll notice that home is basically being bound to just like a plain string, and there's nothing special going on. And so if we think about it, this is really no different than just declaring your home page directly as a component, like rendering out on the screen. But what we'd like to do is actually make it something that is managed via JavaScript. And so what we could do in this particular case is we can say, you know what, let's do this. Let's create a computed property, and we'll call it, and this time, this one is called current page, and then we'll say render page. And the way render page will work, we'll say is, actually, yes, this is how it'll work. Return this
Return this current page
plus whatever. So basically, we're looking at the naming of the component here. In this case, it's home page, and so we can see.
This oppose. Okay, this is part of the composition here. Okay, exactly. This is a current page, and
now that because we can see now because we're only basically having the current page defined via the first part of it via home and login. This means that we can basically tag it onto page. Let me save that now. And then bind this.
And then bind this to the render page so we can compose that.
There we go. Let's swap it in and out now. And so what's really cool about this now is that you basically get the ability to do some pretty complex logic things, and then more importantly, you can actually start then, when it comes to really making your applications dynamic and like having the backend define maybe which components your users prefer, because you're managing a CMS site that might render out certain widgets. You might actually then do a loop through your store, or there's like a bunch of things that you end up being able to do with this. But something I just wanted to expose to you all, because as we go through, this concept is actually going to show up again as we go through.
This is quite interesting because, again, it's just exposing you what are the things that is doing React behind the scenes. Exactly. And, yeah, what are the things that what are the things that Vue is doing behind the scenes, and also provide you a context of what are we gonna do the things. But yeah, but again, totally, we need to actually make an example in real life with the Pokemon API.
Okay, so for the exercise, we're actually going to be using one of my new favorite APIs called JSON Placeholder. If you haven't heard about it, it's pretty great. Because what it does is it basically provides a bunch of static data that requires no authentication key or anything. And what it allows you to do is it has a bunch of different data sets that allow you to relate between them. So basically, we'll see here, we take a look at users, for example. Users has an ID, has all this data ready for you. But then if you take a look at something like to-dos, you'll notice that it even has user ID and it relates back to those users. And so what you basically have is rather than having like a dynamic database that oftentimes goes like either unmaintained or eventually goes out of service, this is really just a bunch of static JSON, but we get to request it as if it were from the back end. And so this is the API that I recommend you all use going forward when it comes to our exercises. And so for our exercise, you're going to be using the Stay View app, and this time your product manager has come to you and says, we need a user page component, right? So we're going to give you some practice as far as basically go ahead and create that user page inside the component folder. And then inside of that component, go ahead and use that created lifecycle to go ahead and fetch all the users from that JSON placeholder API using what we just showed you. And then go ahead and render that however you see fit. And then go ahead and make sure you update app.view so that if you want to use that dynamic component, that it actually swaps it out correctly when you're using the navigation. Okay, so first thing first, what do we want to do? We want to create a user page, all right? So we're going to so I'm going to go ahead and actually, you know what? So actually, default, we're just going to show is that, well, we need local dev running. Go ahead and run a function. List equals what? We're going to hasn't been created yet. This is our reactive data. So we can go ahead and create that. Now that we do it, great. We can actually see all our users here, but we're going to go ahead and pretty that up a little bit because that is pretty hard to read. So I'm just going to do an unordered list. And for every one of these users, so user, it does, View will tell you inside of the console log, hey, by the way, I'm seeing duplicate keys for elements. And that, there we go. You can see now, refresh. Okay, we got a lot going on. Now for a second here, I panicked because I was like, why are we seeing double? Are we seeing double? Because we have three elements still there. Save that now and refresh. There you go, much better. And now we have all our users being rendered on the page.
And is there a way with the dev tools to see the unique IDs of those items?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we take a look at what the context here is that this dynamic key that we're assigning, in this case, user-1 and so forth, the question here is around the idea, is there any way to individual keys? Like we can inspect the elements in here and all the data in here, specific with your code. You can just play around with it right there. Cover this at the bare minimum through this, like a real world scenario. That, a user type, and I'm just gonna say user key, which I think I saw a glimpse of that a second ago. There we go. The keys are showing up in this case. So it does look like if you want to inspect the DOM element one, that remains to be a little bit elusive. But that said, still a worthy question worth investigating into.
On the topic of keys, are those keys, they need to be unique on a globally all items rendered on page, or is it kind of scoped to the component? So if your component renders one list, is it safe to just
Exactly, they have to be globally or?
Oh, sorry. The yup was acknowledging the question. Okay. So the question here is around the scoping of keys, right? Because we talked about the scoping of data, right? Data
Scoping of
keys, components,
yeah.
and we have to be very explicit about how it's shared. Keys, however, are different because it has to do with whatever's on the page. So there's no scoping in regards to keys. And this is very important in particular when it comes to animation entry.
So no scoping, okay.
Keys, however, are different because it has to do with whatever's on the page. So there's no scoping in regards to keys. And this is very important in particular when it comes to animation and transitions, is because if you want Vue to start managing some of those pieces, those keys do really need to be unique. Otherwise, you'll start seeing weird glitches of like Vue trying to calculate how to move things around and like 2 or 3 things at once. And so, yeah, I would treat keys as a universal thing. This is why knowing the data...
I will treat key as a universal thing. Interesting.
Knowing the data
as a global.
That is why I prefixed it with user, so that later we can have like photos or comments or whatever we decide takes. So, good question though. Cool. So we have the ability to go back here to home and log in, but we don't have a user link, so let's actually just make sure we wrap that up properly. So for now, we're just going to keep it simple here. You might notice though when you're inspecting the nav that I'm doing something a little bit hacky. One is that this is technically an anchor link, but the anchor link doesn't go anywhere. Technically, you want to wait. We do this so context of being attached to an event. User, that looks good, and then here show user page.
Oh, okay.
Page
okay.
User. Okay. Okay, that looks good. Before we move on though, what I do want to cover, there was a question in the chat, which is actually a great one, regarding how do you actually generate unique keys on the front end. And so to be clear, so the thing that I've shown you over this workshop, I'm going to guess at a unique data type, which is, this works, I think, when you're just prototyping and working on things, but obviously on an human error. The NPM module, how it works is you'll install UUID on your project, and you basically, as you especially, creating new data that you might be sending to the backend. So you might actually have a case where I'm going to just pseudocode this. We're not going to install it because that would just add to the load. But for the sake of demoing this, let me just go ahead. You import it at the top of your file, and then as part of like creating the new form. So actually, this does
Crypto.random UUID. Crypto.random UUID. That's interesting. On the web, can you access it? Oh, interesting. Interesting. In secure context, of course. This figure is available in web workers. Let's take a look at this. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to now build. Yeah, completely. This is needed, bro. This is absolutely needed. UUIDs. So I can have access to that, to the crypto, right? Okay, I can access to the crypto. Is this instance method? Okay, I need to create an instance, which means that I need to do this. I need to call the function constructor to create a new instance. Let me actually assign this to say, hey, creepy, right? And then under the creepy, so I would say crypto, right? And then in crypto, I want to say, hey, crypto, I want to call now this UUID, random UUID methods, okay, for that, and then run it. It's an illegal constructor. Okay, here we go. So it thinks that I don't need to do that as it is. It seems that it's just only call that crypto, right? Illegal construction. How do I call this? Returns a randomly generated 36 character long v4 UUID. The crypto is available in window using the window.crypto property. But again, I can use that. I can say, hey, crypto, calling that function, and then assign to something. No. Interface represents basic cryptography features available in the current context. It allows access to the cryptography, strong random number generators, and cryptography primitive. Cryptography primitive. Cryptography primitive like hashing, signing, encryption or decryption. Holy French toast. I get it. It's only available in secure context. Again, you can say like this. You can say crypto. But it's interesting. It doesn't. It say, hey, this is crypto, right? If I run this, it say, of course. Okay. What if so I have hacks. So this is available on here. So I say crypto, right? Illegal construction. Okay. This feature is available in web workers. Crypto dot apply. That's interesting. is like this. It's not a function. This is a function and this is a function. Crypto key, crypto. But in secure context, you're supposed to generate this one like this, right? It's an illegal construction. Okay. Subtle crypto. And allow you to access to the primitive. This is interesting. But this does not, exactly, this feature is available only in secure context in some or all supporting browsers. So you can use this and this, but you say, hey, this is not defined here. You can also use this self crypto random UUID, assuming the self crypto is available. What in the F is self is window. But if I access through the window, isn't the same thing? If I say crypto, oh my god, it's because it is under this. Okay. The documentation here is not good. Anyway, the documentation here is not good any freaking way. Okay, but we can have access as a way to generate this random number. Okay, we can have access to the window context. Good. Okay, all right. Well, what am I gonna do? In this half an hour, actually create is this. In this half an hour is creating this this Pokemon. I would like to use this the Pokemon list. Yeah, the Pokemon list in React and in Vue. Okay, that'll be a very great experiment to actually see the subtle difference here. Remember, using the option API in the context of Vue, right? So let's go into actually where we're gonna do this. So, all right. Okay. So what I'm gonna do here is to say, hey, ls complete intro to. I wanna create now is a complete intro to Vue workshop. I want to create now is a system design, React performance, and all that kind of stuff. API design is the CITR V8 project now. CD okay, yeah, because this is not part of this. It's in fact part of my test. Okay, that's right. And here, okay, make there Pokemon, Pokemon, Pokemon app. All right, say I just want to use a more descriptive name, which is view 3 versus React 18 Pokemon app. Right, it's much more better, it's more descriptive. And let me do this. In fact, it's like this. All right. Well, we can say remove in a recursive force way the Pokemon app, followed by this, and create that as expected. Okay, so getting to this. And right now you're not able to see what I'm doing, but you will. Okay, let me open okay, let me open here cursor, right? So now I'm going to show you what I'm about to do, and that is anyway, here we are. Follow me along. Is this one? No, is this one? Is this one? No, I don't think I have that. Enable it. Alright, no problem. Let's get into this. Just going to go cursor. This one. Here we are. Okay, so what am I gonna do here is to first I'm going to create now two applications. React 18 using now Next, React 18 and Vue, and I'm going to build is this Pokemon list as well as the detail page to see what is the difference here, and that's something interesting as a way to understand how now each one of those frameworks, each one of those approaches try to solve their problems, and also how long it takes to me. So we have now, we're gonna do this in 15 minutes, right? Let me actually measure my time. Okay, so let's go first with I don't want to use any AI tools because they actually generate a lot of garbage. Not right now. But what I can do here is to now provide some sort of fine-tune instructions for that. You know what I mean? We can use Cloud for that. Let me actually let me actually here is okay. I think I'm gonna regret this, but this is an experiment here. Let me here is now use claw to indicate what I want to build here in React and Vue. Okay, and be very specific about that. So as a software engineer, as your role as a software engineer is to build a web app. Okay, your role is to build a web app. Your role as a software engineer with 10 years of experience. This is the role. This is your task. Okay, is to build a web app. Okay, that contains a list page and a detail page. Okay, so your role as a software engineer with 10 years of experience is to build a web app that contains list page, detail page, pulling by pulling data from the this is the Pokemon list, Pokemon API. All right, the Poke API here. All right, in version 2 exactly. By pulling data from the Poking API here, okay, constraints, show 10 elements in the list page. Okay, so show show 10 show 10 elements, show 10 Pokemon in a list page. Okay, in the list page, show image constraint. Okay, we can also do this. So in list page, show 10 Pokemons. Okay, in list page, show 10 Pokemons. Okay, with exactly in list page Pokemon, show 10 Pokemons card with the format Pokemon card with the image, exactly, with the image, title, number, okay, image, title, number. They have description. Not sure if they have that. Ability. And abilities, right? Image, title, number, or image and title. No, image, title, and number. And I know. They don't. This is the abilities, the cries, forms, game index. Health item. Okay, but this is D2. What about Bulbasaur? Base experience. Order 1. And the other is D2. Order 214. ID 132. Okay. ID 1. Okay. Okay, by the ID. Okay. Alright. Card with image, title, number, or number, ID. Right? And in show detail page, show a card with image, title, ID, abilities. No, yeah, and abilities. And abilities. Okay, so this will be, of course, be very specific, very broad for him, because we are not giving it exactly instruction about that. And this is when now, when you talk about with this AI, you need to be very specific about what you want. So you're also a software engineer with 10 years of experience to build a web app that contains list page, detail page, by pulling data from the Pokemon API. Constraint: in the list page, show 10 Pokemon's card with the image, title, ID. In detail page, show a card with image, title, ID, and abilities. So make okay. So there's some constraint. Show 10 Pokemon's card with the image, title, ID. In detail page, show a card with image, title, ID. Okay, and make generate this using React 18, and then we're gonna do another prompt, which is using the and the Pokemon card, in the Pokemon list. But as you can see, it's actually generating all of the things for us. So far so good, right? This is the detail page. All right. Using use effect for that. That's right, it's loading error in Pokemon here. It's now returning this and all of this. And it's also telling me what are the things that I need to run, which is now using the Create React app. But Create React app is no longer being used. Okay. In fact, this is not the recommended way to actually run this, according to React team, right? When they say, hey, I want you to now is to generate, this is the installation, start a new project. It say, hey, go with Next.js. This is interesting. And React Router and tell, again, this is a plain application, right? Without nexting all of that wilding things. All right. So. All right. Okay, cool. Copy here. The question is, if we're about to use now create a React app. Question: is this still been a thing? Is this still been a thing? Okay. Okay. So okay, they're gonna provide you this folder structure for that. We're not going. Okay, I'm not going with Next, even though that I can do that with Next. I go with Create React. All right. So here we go. This Create React by behind the scenes. It doesn't provide us it's just providing us a folder structure for that. Let's get into this. Okay, so back to the code here. And here we got is we say React 18 Pokemon app, right? And then React 18 Pokemon app. Let me see, follow me here. That's right. And let's get into this. It say, hey, I'm gonna use this create React app. Please. It's gonna generate all of this folder structure underneath this React 18 Pokemon app. Okay. All the wildness things that it needs to do. Okay. And well, let me actually after that grab all of these components, and then we're going to now decompose them properly. Oh, we need to install this React Router. Why do we need to reinstall React Router? To manage is routing here. Yeah, makes sense. Of course. In Tailwind, because it's actually installing Tailwinds. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, I think good, right? Now that I'm here, if we open up here, it actually creates this folder structure for us. And let me install now is the React Router Tailwind, which is this compiler CSS generator for us. Okay, that'll be good. Okay, report web vitals, set up tests, in our index, which is this. This is the entry point. Good. Is using now in a strict mode. As you can see, what we're getting is the element from the root, and then render this from the app here. So the app is this, okay? And if we try to npm run dev here, I'm assuming it's no. Let me in fact take a look at the package JSON here, and it is npm star. Okay, so npm star. We're gonna see now is this by default, right? Say, hey, it's gonna move in here. Say, hey, there you got it, right? This is the entry point, which is the entry point. So far so good. Now, luckily for us, this was all the code generating for us. So what I can do is to say, hey, look at this. This is the code that was generated, and we can inspect if this code will work as expected, right? By saying, hey, first we are importing React. We actually don't need to do this, okay? But because we are already installed the router, React router, where this React router is now the way how can we detect React router, how can we now detect when we try to navigate inside of these client-side applications, okay? And this has been passed through several rewrites and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, this React router is just a context. So that's why we need to provide this like so, right, as the router. So the question is, because here we are using is the React router version 6.28, which is the latest, okay? Now it say, hey, if you want to create this, if you want to start to use this, you are just going to define is this app, the router here, which is the routes. So because here we only have 2 places to go with in the router, and after all, this is a GS element, it's a context, right? That we need to wrap that. Here we have our navbar. Right now, it doesn't care. But here is when we define is our routes here. We can also instead of doing that, we is just using is the create browser for that. All right. Or in this case, we just use is the route here as a way to let this context, hey, by the time we navigate to this, I want you to show this route or this route, and there's another and another. Okay. So I want you to now is show is the list page or the detail page. So let's go to define here our, let's do this here. No, I don't want to do that. In this example, we don't have TypeScript installed, no problem, because again, the whole point of this is just to see how elements are, how React and Vue handle is data fetching. That's the whole point of this. So yeah, let's go to create now the other component, for example, the navbar here. So how can we do that? Glad you asked. And if you don't do that, no problem. I will answer that. Under the components, we're gonna define is here our navbar. We say, hey, navbar.js. It's important for component name component. It's important for naming components to define this using its two words. In our case, we just go with this. So this is the navbar. Here's what we're gonna define is the row where we want to navigate to. Okay. We also import that under the component, which is something interesting. Okay. And let me also now create the list page and the detail page. So let's get into this. Okay, and let's go to evaluate what it's doing behind the scenes. So this is the list page. So this is the list page. Okay, .js. We paste this code. What we're doing is that, hey, let's go to define this function here, GSX function. Import React. We actually don't need to import React here, right? We just only define our state that we want to keep track, which is in our case is the Pokemon that we're gonna fetch, as well as the loading and the error state. We are here defining is the use effect to perform these side effects, in our case, Ajax requests. The way how we do this is, or how this generated code is by using this, is by saying, hey, let's go to define now is the async operation here, and inside of that define is a try and catch block, right? If everything went well with Pokemon 10 limits, that's right. Okay, now I want you to get this data, and it's a Pokemon details, and I wait for the promise that all as well. Why is this? Because he say he's passing several requests to this. This is quite interesting. This is Pokemon details. First, this is the response, and this is the Pokemon details. Await promise at all of this. Data result and async Pokemon and response with the fetch Pokemon URL. Oh, alright. So look at this. This not only, okay, it's because it's doing, okay, this is something that you have to be careful here. This is something that you have to be careful here. Because, okay, you are now loading is all of the Pokemon detail here. Alright, and not only that, you are fetch the Pokemon URL. And this Pokemon URL, beware with what you're doing. Beware with what you're doing. Which is now the shape of the Pokemon here. For each one of those data that we get from our Pokemon, especially if you now get a list of Pokemons. Especially if you get a list of Pokemons, because if you do something like this, I think I have this extension here for me, so I don't need to leave this. Thunder clients, that's right. So I can now run this, okay, which is a very interesting here. I'm gonna create now this one to actually see what am I getting from that. I'm gonna receive is the result object as it is, which is a great thing. Mm-hmm. I get is this Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, Charmander, Charmeleon. And exactly, it's gonna extract this and it's gonna call the data from this. But look at this. This is when you have to be careful about doing this multiple stuff, because it is good for generating code, but not for making it maintainable, right? So once we get all of this, okay, which is our use effect is gonna get all of these Pokemon, all right, and then populate that with the Pokemon, with set Pokemons and Pokemon details, which is the data that you wanna get from each one of them, right? And then you set the loading to false. If there's any error, you said no, set error here, failure to fetch Pokemon data, and set loading state. And then you're gonna fetch that data, right? You're gonna run this once. If this is loading, you're gonna return now a loading. If this is error, you're gonna return an error. If it's not, then you're going to return now the Pokemon's state that you have stored here, right? All of this. You're gonna show, of course, the Pokemon ID followed by the Pokemon. This is now we identify a particularly maintainability issue here with this, and that is we are doing is multiple network calls, and again for maintainability is not that good. So even though we identify as one of the issue here, okay, let's keep moving to the other components of how it generates that. So for example, here is this one. Now is here is calling to the Pokemon card. Now let's go into define is the Pokemon card component, okay, by going into this and say, hey, this is the component, the Pokemon card.js. Base this code, we're generating is this function. We're gonna pass this now the Pokemon, and here we have a reference to where we're gonna navigate using the link, which is now a component provided by the React router, exactly. And you're gonna render now the image here. You say from default and .Pokemon name. This is quite interesting. Let me see if this actually accurate. How so? By looking at this, and by the time we make another, okay, and by the time we make another request, it's a new request, and in this case a request to that particular Pokemon. In our case, do this because you already have the URLs here. You want to get now that particular Pokemon. Let's go with this and create a new request where this will be this, okay, to get the number 1. Okay, we get this, all right, and here is when we're gonna get is the it say, hey, in the Pokemon card we're gonna have access to the something called sprite and from default. So something called sprite and from default. So you'll actually get that properly, okay. And then it show the name of that. So you take a look at this, and you're gonna show the name. Isn't a way to actually? There you got it. Name my god. Anyway, there you got name Bulbasaur and show that. But it's not showing is the abilities here. It's not showing the abilities here. At least in this card, right? At least in this card. So we can save the Pokemon list. It's actually showing the card. This Pokemon card is going to now redirect that to this particularly Pokemon URL ID, where on the entry point it says it's gonna render now the detail page. Alright, so now this detail page, that is the next component that we're going to write here, it say, hey, the detail page is all of this. Alright, you say, hey, this is not the detail page.js, and there you got it, right? In this detail page, can you follow me? Yeah. In this detail page, again, we don't need to call React because we are actually using that in the entry point here in the app here main. So in this detail page is say, hey, I'm going to define several states because here I'm also going to now is create those Ajax requests, and also gonna keep track of this particularly Pokemon. Okay, is fetching the ID from now this custom hook provided by the React rendering, and say, hey, I'm going to now run this asynchronous function here. Okay. And by the time that is done, okay, I'm going to get that data and actually set that. Okay, so again, this is actually mimicking the same behavior with loading and narrowing and Pokemon and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and here's when it's going to show now in the detail page is the Pokemon sprite from default. It's actually using its tailwind for that Pokemon.name to actually show this in an image. It's actually generating its ID to show the name, the ID of that Pokemon, the name, and followed by the abilities, and the ability name. Okay. So, if we save this, alright, it say, hey, I cannot find now page lists. Oh, okay, yeah, because we need to define is now the pages, pages, exactly, and on the pages is where we're going to put all of these components that we need to. So by the time we run this now in our React, of course it's not look beautiful, but it's actually do what it's supposed to do. I don't think we actually using is the CSS. Yeah, I don't think we are using is, or we are telling to use that. Oh, because we haven't, okay. Again, if we go back here to the browser, it actually show all of this. Of course, because we are not loading is the let me actually load the tailwind here. Load tailwind here. So we need to say, hey, configure your template path. Yes, that's not what we configured. Okay, your template path, which is here. For the tailwind config. Exactly. And then we say, hey, we need to add the tailwind directly to your CSS utilities. On here, it's going to add this UI test utility. We can do that is here. And start the Tailwind CLI build process. Start the CLI based process, in this case build that. Okay, exactly as a way to compile that. You say, hey, please compile is now not the input, is the app.css into the output CSS, right? And now you want is to include that to your entry point, like so. So let's going to include that into our entry point, which must be under the public, the index HTML, and here is when we're going to add that. Say, hey, let me now add this right below this. Right, so now it's supposed to load such content. But I think it's exactly, it's under of course. Let me actually create now a new one. It will say npm star. Oh, it's React 18, so npm star. All right, and this is framework. Okay, Jesus. Okay. Okay. You know what? Let's go with the CDN. Yeah, let's go with the CDN. Yeah, let's go with the CDN. Let's go with the CDN option. Let's go with the CDN option here. That's right. And we want to do this, I think. Okay, so you can process that as you do this. All right, and Yep, let's get into this. And there you got it. All right, exactly. So now it's loading this as expected. Exactly. If we load this, as you can see now, it's loading all of this component in React, right? So if you navigate to this, it will show you now overgrow and grow. Back to the list, over here, right? And it's showing that Venusaur is same for this. And make sure to close this. Back to list, Charmeleon, and that kind of thing. Right? So it actually generates this code. Pretty straightforward, very good. There's some concerns in terms of how you can now strap some logic into their own custom hooks. Okay. So for example, things like this one. Okay. So it actually generate that thing as expected. Similar for this, because here not only we are actually is calling in parallel several of this data here as a way to compose this. Because now if you take a look at this, if you take a look at what it's doing behind the scenes here, it's not only calling is this list, it also is firing its 10 response. Look at this, you know. Well, since we are now in React 18 and this is in strict mode, it's actually firing these things twice to actually prevent if you have any side effects or some errors in your components. But as you can see here is this, and then it's triggered now 10 parallel requests. Something funny here is now they're using HTTP 3 for this. So the server, those server actually was implementing HTTP 3, which is a great thing, because now it doesn't inherit from the HTTP 1. It's not TCP connection. It's in fact it's UDP. It's using the UDP protocol. It means that it's not TCP connected. It supports multiple streams of data. And that's interesting. Headers are compressed by default. It reduces the amount of TCP handshaking that it needs to be done, and that's powerful. But you can see here we are now is calling this 10 times to actually fetch all of these requests and then handle that here, which is with our promise here. It is here. So by saying it's like, hey, I want you to now is firing is all of these requests at parallel with the result of data here. And by the time you get that, I'm going to store all of that, okay, here in the promise, in the Pokemon detail, and then update the state here. Similar for the set loading here. This can be quite good for this, okay. I will have my own opinions here. I prefer to have now this abstract into their own custom logic. But so far so good, because this was a code generated in 40 minutes, bro. 40 minutes. That speaks volume. Okay. That speaks volumes, bro. That speaks volumes. Okay. Okay. Exactly. The Pokemon list or Pokemon app in Create React app. Exactly. Code generated using yeah, code generated using Cloud 3.0. Now I think the version is Cloud 3.0 Sonnet or Opus. I don't know which version of this. I think it's 3.5. Yeah, is this one. Cloud 3.3 Sonnet. Okay. Go generating with this Cloud 3 Sonnet. Takeaways or observations. Okay. Or prompt use, like that. Observations. Prompt use is this one. Time taken to make it work. A time taken to verify and make it work. 45 minutes, right? And then you get now observations here. Code generated is code generated follow exactly code generated follow ECMAScript next yeah, code generation follow ECMA next. It is not useful. Code is clean. Not abstract. Exactly. So it doesn't exactly good for spin up things. If context, good for spin up thing from scratch. From scratch, Jesus, from scratch. Okay. Code generation follow next. Code is clean, good for spin up things. Jesus fucking Christ. Code generated follow ECMA next. And React functional approach. Code is follow the code generated follow ECMAScript next and React functional approach. Follow the concurrency. handle concurrency in use effect. Exactly, handle concurrency in use effect. May need code review when generating may need code review when performing network waterfall. Or when performing AJAX requests or network requests. Okay, may need code review when performing network requests. Exactly, code review is needed when performing network requests. And code validation. And good, but yeah, it's most likely automating that process. And that was huge, bro. This is huge, bro. We can say this is now the on the navbar. You say here is React 18 Pokedex. Exactly. React 18 Pokedex, and there you got it. Holy moly. That was mind blowing, bro. Absolutely mind blowing, because it's following all of these guidelines. Take a look at this. Is this one? Pokemon app in Create React. This project was bootstrapped with Create React, code generated using Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Time taken to verify and make it work, 45 minutes. Observations is this one. Alright. Holy moly, bro. That's good. That's good. Now let's going to do the same for Vue, bro. Now let's go to do the same for Vue, bro. Alright. So first things first, I'm going to here is say, hey, git status. I want to add everything, bro. Git status. Okay. Okay. Yes, that's right. Git commit with a message. First commit. Okay. And then you say, hey, let me push this to a repo that I want to create right now on GitHub. Okay. So we create a new here. You say, hey, React 18 Pokedex, right? So create this repo with nothing. We're going to now instead add this to there. So Alright. And by the time we reload this, we already have this one. Holy moly, bro. Jesus. Okay. And understand that how he made this thing with using his grid and grid calls and that kind of thing. Alright. So the other is now do that, but with view. So using now the same extension here. Come on. Using now the same prompt, but now in this case is with view. Okay. Come on, man. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Oh, shit, stop. Stop, bro. Hey, can you? It is too hard for you to do that? Oh, come on. Really? Come on. Jesus. Really? No, 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 because you want to do this. No, 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 no. No, it's not what you think it is, it's what it is, man. Jesus. Come on. Is this one a list page and a detail page? So if I say this, you're gonna okay. Oh my god. Okay, by pulling data from here, man. Okay, chill, bro. Chill. So this is not constraint. Okay, in list page show element and in detail page so generate now using is view 3. Pretty much the same. Right now you're not able to see this, but let me show you this. Pretty much the same prompt, but now is on view 3. Okay. There you got it. So now, because here view, remember at the end of the day, is a reactive compiler optimized rendering systems, that's what it's doing here. You know, that's exactly what it's doing here as it is. So here we're using is not the composition API, not the option API, which is a good thing. And we're going to use now the create view latest, right? So, all right, let's get into this. So we're starting here like this. I'm assuming that this will take me is like another 45 minutes. Okay. That's right, another 45 minutes. Yeah, what is the 45 minutes here? And there you got it. Okay. Let me actually create a project here. And you're going to follow me as it is. let's get into this. Pop. Here we are. Now we're about is to create is but for view 3, right? I'm going to now use this script. This is the Vue.js, the progressive JavaScript framework. It's a now the name of this will be is View 3 Pokemon app. Okay. Do you want to add TypeScript? No, not at all. Again, this is just a simple demo. You know, this is just a simple demo. So no TypeScript, no JavaScript, no JS support. View router for single page applications. Yes, because we're gonna use that. No need for Pinia because we're not going to manage any state right now. No need for unit tests. No need for any end-to-end testing solution. Code quality, yes. Interpreter for code formatting, yes. Good. Let's get into this. View 3 Pokemon here. In fact, let me actually open up here. Say, hey, I want to open this under the under the what is this? Wait, what the French toast is this? Yeah, what the French toast is this? Could you please open up in cursor? And not only that is to actually open that in here. No. Open recent. There you got it. Here, exactly. But I don't wanna. No, my bad. Can I go back? Because I want to stay here. Look at now the code that was generated by Vue 3. This is scaffolding code. This is scaffolding project structure here. Is now using Vite, and unlike here is now using is for building React script. Is using something called React script for that. Might be using what React script is using behind the scene. That's a very interesting question here. What React scripts actually using, because it's actually bundled this. One dependency, no required, no configuration required, no login. You can eject to a custom. Okay, what's include? Okay, that's exactly what I want. GSX, EXIS, TypeScript, and Flow syntax, language extra beyond, auto prefix, fast interactive unit test. Okay, test runners, a development server, a build script to bundle GSS. Okay, a build script to bundle GSS, JavaScript, CSS, and image for production with hashes and source map, an offline first service worker and web app manifest, meeting all the progressive web app criteria. Note, using the service worker is opt-in and higher. Hassle-free updates for this. Interesting the thing that it has behind the scenes. This doesn't have any build step, any build process. It just have a build script here, a live development server, and a test runner. Okay. But here, now Vue 3 have a lot of things going on. It actually provides Vite for that. We also install is in our entry point. Yeah, let me actually close all of these things relevant to React. in view 3 it say, hey, now do we have is this theme, in the entry point we have now the app. We have is the app as well as the entry point and the router component, that here it follow is the middleware approach. Unlike, this is interesting because unlike now React that is using is the context approach, which is providing these components. It's gonna put that as at a particularly specific at a particular point under the tree. So all of those children components now can have access to that. This is the way how it works from the DOM perspective. But now here in Vue says, hey, no. We're going to handle this in a middleware sense as a way to add now features pretty much like Node.js work behind the scenes. Okay. Jesus. All right. Okay. And all right. Okay. We already installed Vue Router, but we haven't installed Axios. This is quite interesting. And my question is that why do we need to install Axios since we can use this fetch for that? You know what I mean? Why do we need to use Axios if we can use this fetch for that? It's gonna mimic that behavior here. And in the context of React components here, exactly. Some performance optimization here are not considered to this. There is another from a scratch. The other is fetching relevant for performance optimizations, a more specific, exactly, for performance optimization, a more specific prompt must be defined. Exactly. So, all right. Prompt must be defined. Okay, so that's good with this. And the other, right? And the other is, let's get into view 3. So, okay, this is interesting because it's like, why do we need to use Axios and not use is the fetch, which is now widely available for that? Okay. view router is already installed. We can also install is this. This is one of the things that I don't like about this. Um, exactly. With create view. Yeah, there's a couple things here that is doing that. Okay, it's making assumption. Okay, exactly. Making assumptions of which libraries uh, should we use. Exactly. Make assumption which library should we use, which instead of relying on native APIs. Okay, for example, Axios. Make assumption on which library should we use instead of relying on native apps. That's the thing here. All right, so let's go with the index, right? Where in our index we're going to define is our route here, and also the router here, like so. So now, unlike React here, you're going to have this thing here. It will say, hey, I want you to know create is this, and also going to export is the router, as you can see here, right? Exactly. But okay, 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 okay. So we got now the entry point. The entry point say, hey, we're going to now import this, blah 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 blah, and all that kind of thing. Let's go to now install this particular libraries. View route is already installed, so I don't need to install that. All right. Not only that, but I also want to install is a Tailwind for that. Good. And now in this case, assuming you are using Tailwind CSS. Exactly. So now in our main, which is the entry point, and say, hey, are you using now the Tailwind CSS? So let's go to now Tailwind CSS. All right. This is one of the things that it doesn't produce. Okay. It's actually not generating that. Source input CSS. You indicate the template path to the content. You know, this kind of configuration is not provided for us. So, okay. All right. And then you go into your index.cs, assume that you have that index.css, and then you paste all of the things that are needed here, and then you run the build process or the dev process here, which means that by saving this, it say, hey, cannot find no, chill. We're gonna render only the app here, right? And we're gonna change this React Me here. I just want to do is this. Is this file was modified? Okay. Get diff. So get diff source. Oh, okay, get init. All right. So get diff. This is interesting. I didn't modify this file. It's like by mistake I wrote. Okay. So if I say npm run def, no matching exporting. Oh, okay, because I haven't imported the router. Exactly. So router here is something that I'm going to get from here, which is the router path here. So here, by creating now this router and say, hey, this is the router, this is the index, we already create that. That's right, but this is not what we're gonna do. In fact, this is the page that we're gonna show here. So far, this router, okay, that is an index.js, it say, hey, no match in source router index.js for import router. That's something interesting. It's not recognizing that on that particular file, because it's an export, it's a default export for that. Okay. All right. So now if we navigate to that, there you got it. Okie dokie. Good. So by the time now that we want is to actually add some routing here, which is, hey, let's go into now is modify here the router that we're going to expose, and that it means that we're gonna save this. Of course, you're gonna throw a particular error because here we're gonna register is our route in this way, as you can see here. It's not following this particular convention that we would like to have, right? So it means that here we're gonna have our routes here. This is if you want to now import this dynamically, doing code splitting at route level. In our case, we don't want to do that. Okay, we just want is to use the route and import them statically. All right. Similar for this view that we haven't defined right now, but we're about to use it. Okay. And well, having this, and there you got it. So instead of doing this, right, we're just importing that our route as expected. So of course you're gonna complain about some couple of routes because it say, hey, but I don't have them, and that's true. But for our purpose, exactly. But for our purpose, let's go to actually create those components here. So let's get into this. First, under the view, we have about view and home view. Let's go to remove this. We're not gonna use that any longer. We're going to define is the list page. This list page that comes here, as you can see here, using is now the composition API with setup. Under the, let's go to remove this one because we're not gonna use this or this one or this one. Not to mention the icons here, none of this, exactly, remove icons, and it's under the view where we're going to define that, right? Yeah, list page and now detail page, just like that. So there you got it. Okay, but first let's going to start with the entry point here, where here the entry point will be something as simple as this, where we're gonna say, hey, I want you to now is just render this. Okay, in fact it doesn't generate like things like navbar and that kind of thing, you know. It doesn't generate that for us. No, it doesn't generate that for us. Yeah, it doesn't generate that for us. In fact, it's using now the router view for that. So here it started to having a little bit more nuance here. On the create app, you got is this important create app and all of this kind of stuff. And so if you now want to see this, it will say, hey, there's a couple components that doesn't exist. It's going to create them, which is the list page. All right. Here under the view called is list page dot view, because it's a view component, right? And as you can see here, are you following me here? Yes. Here we define is a template again, because this template is a valid is a valid HTML DOM element that say, hey, browser, please store this for me in memory, and when I tell you, I want you to now run or load this on the DOM at runtime. This is one of the most used cases for templates, right? But the thing here is that you are telling to the DOM, hey, you're telling to the browser, hey, store these elements for me in memory, and don't render that on load or initially. Here we define is now the component, the composition API, defining of reactive reference. Here, instead of using the option API, we're using is now this way of doing that, the composition here. And this is interesting because composition is also a term from the functional programming as a way to now allow us to build this kind of applications. So we got this Pokemons. Here we can define is our asynchronous logic or a logic here that can be reused if you use some sort of composables. So instead of actually defining this, we can use abstract them into our own composable and define in those composable reactive values that we can keep track, or we can delegate. We can let the view 3 to keep track for us, and we can make use of them. So yeah, this is pretty much how you can do this. And because now, like the state management, here in Vue, you say, hey, this is how you can do this kind of thing. All right, with this reactive reference by accessing through the promise.value. Okay. Again, the mindset here is that unlike the option API, which is much more, in my opinion, descriptive about what you are describing, what are the story that you're telling to this machine, to this view, to this rendering system. It's like, hey, I want you to keep track of this state under the data, as well as all of the methods and functionalities. So whether it's functionality like methods useful for attach that to a particularly callback to attach that method to a callback in an event handler on click, on key, on mouse over, or any of these events, or using now computer property for derive some state from this reactive data. A good example of that is like, hey, I want you to now transform this into an uppercase or to a lowercase or to a camel case, or derive some computation from that, or watch for data. And also you can, for performing is side effects. We're gonna see later on how now here by using is a much better, is a way of how you can now load the data when the component is mounted, as well as the life cycle. And how you can register is now how this instance of view, this rendering system, is going to keep track of the components that it needs to render, as well as the events that it can emit, and also the props as well. So this is something that you can see a lot, and it's much more descriptive in the option API than in the composition API. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're telling to Vue, hey, I want you to now is register this reactive data. Please keep track of them. And now let's go to define some sort of methods, computer properties, watcher if you need that, events that are going to emit, or props that are going to receive. And if I want to now pass dynamic data, I can use slot for that. And if I need to fetch data, I can use is the programmatically based on a particular state change. I can use watch. There's some performance penalty from that, or I can use this part of the life cycle that is unmounted. Unlike React, by using its use effect in the functional way, it's pretty much like you're fetching data on this lifecycle hook known as component mount. Awesome. Awesome, man. Awesome. But this is something that it's doing here, right? And because we are getting all of these Pokemons, okay? And by the time we get this response data here, as part of the Axios, which is one of the things that I don't like that you use Axios, but because this code is used, this code was generating is by a lot of Vue3 examples, as what happens. So here we got, this is result, response data, and results, okay? And here we are now performing with promise all. Let's say, hey, let's go to now all of this, let's go to perform all of these parallel requests, okay? And by the time all of them are resolved, all right. So when all of these promises when all of these promises are resolved, get me the data. Or if any of them fail, return is a reject, right? Which is something that we're handling here with promise at all. And this is interesting. So once we get that data, all right, then this data will be available in our components so it can render that, right? Which means that it follows this particular component lifecycle hooks in Vue that start from the composition, and then you have now the before created. After that is when now the option API is created, the instance of the option API is created, so you can have access to the data, to the reactive data and all the method and properties. Right after that, you have now the created lifecycle. It usually unmounted, but here is not recommended to use this unmounted. Anytime you want to fetch for data, this is something interesting. Anytime you want to fetch some data, you do that on created. On created. Wait, what? What are you looking for? Before mount. before mount, but this is on update, on mounted. Is the uncreated doesn't exist no longer? Unmounted. This is interesting because it things like they changed that. Okay. It things like they changed that. Which is unmounted. This life cycle does not exist. Created. Okay, it's now called created. Created. Let's go to modify this, but after we create our components, right? So we identify some couple issues here with this code generation. And the other is the detail page, like so. Right? Here is a detail page. Detail page dot view. And there you got it. So detail page. On detail page. Okay. And then pretty much that's it. Pretty much that's it. Pretty much that's it. Pretty much that's it. So if we run this again, that's right, we navigate to the Vid application and say, hey, component hello world does not exist. It's trying to load that component. No problem. That's right. There you got it. And there you got it, right? It actually load all of this. Again, it doesn't load in the anyway. On the index.html, I prefer to load this because this is not this is not needed, bro. This is not needed. This is a nice to have, but let's keep going here with what we really care about that. Okay. So actually it's this one. So I create this. This is code that is generated here. I'm assuming that because they have some sort of, it's gonna remove this style from here. We're not gonna need that. All right. And it generates this particular code as it is. That's interesting. It's because they're adding some CSS stuff here. This code was not generated adequately, by the way. Hmm. This code is not generated adequately. Hmm. Yeah, this code is not. It was not generated. Hmm. There's a couple stuff here that is being applied. There's a couple styles that is being applied here. There's a couple styles that is being applied here. Most likely by the router here, and the way how it's being applied. This kind of stuff. Hmm. And it is using some sort of grid here to actually show this element. Who told you to do this? Good, you want to show them here, but by the time you show that content is like you're not showing that properly. You're not showing is hmm 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 hmm. Again, this is code generated by this. Okay, this is code generated by this. this is code that is generated by this. Hmm. So for some reason now you are generating is this code here with this under the assets. Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. So under the assets you are now loading is okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So under the assets you are now providing is this. So you okay. This is another thing that is not again is providing you this fixed stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So now the browser is render this there. You have now a grid container here that is being created with this. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, there's some couple stuff that's going on here, especially when you're creating this. Okay. So again, this code generations in Vue requires more careful thinking and planning. Jesus. Okay. Perhaps in React is much more straightforward for this basic stuff. For this basic stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Holy moly. Mm-hmm. Jesus, French toast guy, bro. Mm-hmm. So, here in the Pokemon list, if we navigate to this, it really works, right? Back to list, show you this. It's actually using the router navigation for that. Okay. And let me actually put now here in the Pokemon list page. Which is Pokemon list. React 18 Pokedex. And then you say, hey, Vue 3 Pokedex. Right? Okay. Hmm. 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 Okay. But again, it's working. Uh, mm-hmm. Some consideration of this code. All right. Some consideration. What time is it? Okay. Yeah, roughly 50 minutes. Right? 50 minutes. so well, make assumption of which libraries should we use instead of relying on native API. 2, um, exactly. So make assumption of which library should we use instead of relying on native API. Parallel or network this is more like network optimization here, because it's like code review is needed when performing network requests. Code review is needed when performing network requests and code validation. In class style for styling. Code validation and styling. Right? This is one of the things that it's doing. It doesn't follow the latest trend or the latest good practice to fetch data. To fetch data, or for fetching data. For fetching data. Okay. So let's go to actually create now this another repo here, right? And say, hey, this will be now the React 18 Pokedex. Okay, so it means that, let me create now a new repo here. Let me now create a new repo here. View 3 Pokedex. There you got it. Okay, so git status. Alright, so you say git commit with a message. First commit. And then you say git push origin to main. Alright, and then you got it, right? So when you do this, you get already this one. And now it's time for us to mount that inverter. So we can get those. All right.
Eastern Austria. I was gonna say this is it's a Germanized Slav. Well, let's go back into your past. We're gonna figure out right now if it's Western Europe or Eastern Europe. When you were growing up and you went to your grandparents' house, was the toilet inside the house or outside the house? We're gonna get to the bottom of this immediately, okay? Where was the toilet, Johannes? Outside. Oh! One of us! One of us!
Interesting. That's.
Hay algunos animes que vale la pena ver sola.
Americans have one superpower, which is we will shit can absolutely anything. and until
Capitalism works because it makes you fire your best friend.
right, if you can't fire your best friend, if you can't tear the entire structure down, if you can't cannibalize your last product to put out your new iPhone, you're going nowhere.
Yeah,
And
all the
so-
successful systems take feedback from free markets or nature. And it's when you're when you're president, you say, I'm not going to listen to what the market's telling me. I know what's right. That's when you're going to fail economically. If you say, we don't need Tesla or we don't need electric cars, we don't need to go to space, you're setting us back centuries as humanity, right? You're not taking feedback from nature, and we could just be wiped out on this earth.
Un rayo más de esa cosa y a la mierda. Entonces después me vuelvo para mi casa y ¿qué le pasa a mi mujer? Adivina. No quiere garchar. No quiere garchar. Empieza a joder con que le duele la cabeza y que tuve un mal día y yo siempre estoy re preparado y me pasa siempre, escúchame, siempre lo mismo te digo, me pasa así, una forra. Sí, una forra. Así que como te digo, negro, va.
Alright, you lot don't know this, but it's your girl Charlene's birthday, and her boyfriend Phil got us to do this message. It's gonna be a bit of a sticky one still. You get me, Charlene?
Blow out your candle standard, that cake get dipped. Stand up, take some pics. Post on Instagram, Snapchat, crack that bottle of champagne and take some sips. In France, they say bon anniversaire. Shout out all the man them that's here. Like Lynn from accounts, Tim from HR, and your line manager Claire. Oh yeah, let's not forget your boyfriend Phil. He's a good boyfriend still. Could've gave you a box.
Exactly, start deployment here. Behind the scene is now using this Docker as a way to deploy the CI/CD process. He's now using vid as the preset. God damn it. There's a lot of preset. Jesus, merchants of complexity, man. Merchants of complexity, man. Merchants of complexity, bro. That's what I call them. Merchants of complexity, man. Well, that'll be all for this video. Take care.